I would love to see like a psychiatrist take, or like a mental health expert's take on the effect of streaming on Twitch and my gender identity. I was talking about this to a friend earlier. They asked me about like the classic. Do you think like Twitch chat, Twitch donation, Twitch fucking just streaming on Twitch? What effect do you think that had on either my coming out or my like my gender identity as a whole? Did Twitch crack the egg? Was I conditioned to be transgender? Oof, it's complicated. That's my answer. I would love to pose that to a like mental health expert, because genuinely I don't think I know. I don't think I know the answer entirely. I am definitely leaning on one side of the answer, but it definitely had an effect. There's just no way it hasn't. I want someone to dig into my psyche. A healthy gamer, Dr. K, my answer's yes. If you invite me on and you want to talk about it, my answer's yes. I would love to. It would be kind of funny.
Hey guys. Okay, so I'm going to be diving into Finster psychology. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I am a detransitioner and I have studied the topic of how gender dysphoria develops in young men quite a bit. And I need to talk about something called rapid onset autogynephilic gender dysphoria. So, first of all, if you don't know who we're talking about here, this is Finster. Finster, it started off as a Minecraft Twitch streamer. Then he started cross dressing on stream and started getting some notoriety for being like a femboy, kind of doing those classic viral clickbait videos where you sort of pretend to be a girl, and then you're on like a random stream with Omegle or something like this, and then and then you open your mouth and you speak and you get shocked. It's kind of like classic internet femboy content. And this he started getting a lot of notoriety, and so he started cross dressing more and more on his stream, and started attracting a transgender community. And in this transgender community on his Twitch channel, as a Twitch streamer, many of these trans people started saying things like "you're an egg, you're an egg, you're an egg." If you don't know, an egg is a trans person on the inside, but they haven't realized that yet until their egg cracks and they realize that actually I'm not just a crossdresser. I'm actually really a transgender person. I'm a trans woman on the inside. And so you started to see this evolution in his presentation over time. I think he started identifying as like gender fluid at some point, or non-binary, started using he him pronouns and she her pronouns, or any pronouns. And I'm not sure the latest on how he particularly identifies. I think he may still identify as like gender fluid rather than full blown I'm a woman, I'm always been a woman. But regardless, he got on hormones. He started taking hormones. And yes, this idea of like can gender identity be conditioned by social pressure? Because that very concept, posing that question of like, could a gender identity be something that's conditioned through exposure to online pressure, online communities, or just spending a lot of time in transgender communities where all your friends are transgender. He started dating a transgender woman. And so there's a lot of questions here that are interesting, that fly in the face of traditional gender ideological theories on regards to the origins of gender identity, because the mainstream transgender ideology says that gender identity is something that you're innately born with. You're born that way. It's innate, it's immutable, you can't change it. All you can do is discover your innate immutable gender identity. And so the claim here would be that now that he has this gender fluid identity, that somehow that gender fluid identity was innate and immutable. Like he was born that way, and then it just took many years for him to discover that truth about who he really is, who his authentic self is. And if he goes on later to develop a more binary identity as a woman, then the claim would be that that binary identity as a woman is his true authentic self, that he was born that way. It's innate, it's immutable, and just a matter of doing some discovery work, some self journeying to discover your true self. But eventually, you'll arrive at your true, authentic, innate gender identity. Now, the countervailing theory that I've talked a lot about on my channel stems from the work of Dr. Ray Blanchard, the theory of autogynephilia, which says that in the vast majority of cases, with males who struggle with gender issues, gender identity issues, gender confusion, cross dressers, and all these things, it stems from something called autogynephilia, just love of oneself as a woman. Essentially, you have some degree of heterosexual attraction to women. You are a man. You find women attractive. You find femininity attractive. Even if you find femininity in males attractive, the key point is that you're attracted to femininity. But then somehow or another, that attraction to femininity becomes inverted upon yourself, such that normally speaking, our sexual attractions are such that they're oriented towards other. So you have attraction, and your brain says that attraction is normally found in other. Whereas with autogynephilia, your brain says, no, actually, it's possible for me to be attracted to self. So normally, the location of your object of erotic attraction is in other. You have a mechanism, some kind of brain circuit that says that object of attraction must be not self. With autogynephilia, there's like a break in your logic circuitry that says like, okay, now I can be attracted to femininity in self. So the attraction becomes internalized, such you're attracted to the idea of yourself being feminine. You're attracted to the idea of yourself transforming into femininity, because often there's an element of attraction to the transformation process, which is why it's so common for men who have autogynephilia to be attracted to gender bending content. Stories about like erotic stories about transformations and being force feminized, being turned into a girl, being forced to turn into a girl, or all these stories. And it's also very common to be into transgender pornography, to be into other, she-males. And so the idea is you're attracted to she-males, but then you're attracted to the idea of yourself being a she-male. This is very common in the community. And if you know a little bit about Finster's story, you know that this is I don't know how well known this is, but from what I've read about his backstory and some of the behind the scenes things going on with his Twitch streaming, is that he had some wealthy men who had a fetish for femboys and transgender women that paid him a lot of money to go on hormones, to do pornography. I think Finster has like an OnlyFans. Like he's definitely done like hardcore pornography and stuff like this. And so he referenced in that clip I showed at the beginning, Twitch chat, but also Twitch donations, because he had a lot of people donating to watch his content. And so part of the idea is that there's this pressure to feminize. And once you get into this world of forced feminization and trans pornography and OnlyFans and being like an e-thought, because if you go on like his Twitter page, you'll see all this like soft core pornography. Basically, he's just kind of like promoting his OnlyFans. And so there's a level of degeneracy and sexual deviancy in these transgender communities. This sort of content is very common in these transgender communities, these femboy communities, like the whole femboy community. If you go on Reddit, there's a whole entire not safe for work side of the femboy community. It's not just, people, doing this for fun, shits and giggles and stuff. It's really, there's an element of like, there's a strong erotic, not safe for work component to that entire subculture. And it's really driven from autogynephilia. And with autogynephilia, the theory is that your gender identity is downstream psychologically of your sexual drives, your erotic drives. So it's not that you're born with these identities. The identities are a downstream product of your sexuality. So your sexuality comes first, and the gender identity stuff comes later as a result of grappling with this sexuality that makes it such that you're aroused at the idea of yourself becoming feminine, aroused at the idea of feminizing yourself to some degree or another. And so this question of like, in Finster's case, like, was his gender identity conditioned by being a Twitch streamer? It is, in my opinion, the answer is almost certainly yes. Because prior to this, he started off very happy, seemingly, as just a femboy. I'm just a man who likes to cross dress. And then, this endless pressure, you must be an egg, you must be an egg, you must be trans. Um, that psychologically, even at an unconscious level, it starts to mess with you because you realize that your life story matches a lot of people who do identify as trans. Well, it's like, well, you know, like a lot of these trans women also started off with these fetishes, with these kinks, with these, being cross dressers and femboys, but then they developed into trans women. So I have the same life story. So maybe I am also a transgender woman. And so, and this is related to my own personal story because when I first started exploring my gender identity, I had a lifelong history of having like a cross-dressing kink. But then, like this therapist, when Caitlyn Jenner came out as trans, on like Vanity Fair, there's this interview with Diane Sawyer, and my therapist at the time was like, "Hey, you should watch this interview. Maybe you're trans because." Like Caitlyn Jenner also had this lifelong history of, cross-dressing kinks and stuff like that. And so I was like, oh, interesting. I didn't know that having a lifelong history of cross-dressing kink or being a femboy or whatever is compatible with being a transgender woman. And so I went on Reddit and I asked like, okay, like is having this history of cross-dressing fetishism compatible with being a transgender woman? And it turns out not only was that like not incompatible with being a trans woman, it was normal. That is the normal story because you go on these like online trans resource websites like Gender Dysphoria Bible, or there's these popular essays that get sent around called like Beneath the Surface, saying like, oh, it's not just a fetish. Actually, your fetish is somehow evidence that you're really a woman on the inside because fetishes are responses to psychological needs. And the psychological need is this like repression of your innate gender identity that you're born with. So anyway, this idea that autogynephilia can start off relatively mild as just a cross-dressing thing, and then it evolves and escalates. It escalates, and it can escalate due to online pressure. It can escalate for a variety of reasons, but the escalation of the paraphilia is very common. And so what happens though is that as you start identifying as trans, as you start hanging out with trans people, as you start, taking hormones, as you start making it a goal to pass more and more, you start developing gender dysphoria. So your dysphoria gets worse after you decide to transition. This is very common. So that things that like prior to your trans identity, prior to your egg cracking, you may not have had a lot of hatred of particular features of your body. But once you take on the trans identity, now you start hating these parts of your body because they conflict with this new identity that you've constructed. They conflict with your desire to blend in because as you take on this social identity of I'm a trans woman, the social script for trans women in our society is that they use these female spaces. To use female spaces, then you have to blend in. Well, to blend in, you need to do all these things to your body. So you start developing dysphoria about things that never bothered you when you were growing up. So, you may not have ever had a problem with your voice, but now you don't like your voice because your voice conflicts with your identity you're trying to develop. And so This is what I call rapid onset autogynephilic gender dysphoria. The idea that as you take on the trans identity, your dysphoria gets worse because you've made it this goal to pass. And so I don't watch Finster very closely. I just kind of sometimes see clips on the internet because I kind of, for research purposes with like my channel, because I talk a lot about autogynephilia. I talk a lot about how trans identity develops in men. I do interact still, or with a lot of trans feminine communities, and so I've seen this pattern many times, but I'm not particularly aware to what extent Finster's dysphoria has gotten worse. But from what I have seen, it did seem like after he went on the hormones, after he started going down this trans pathway, his mental health seemed to deteriorate. And to me, that's another indication that the gender identity of being a trans person, a trans feminine person who's now a transsexual, who's medicalized themselves, that didn't like fix all these mental health problems that he had, like depression, anxiety, all these things. Like, it kind of made it worse, because this is an indication that this identity is a psychological construction. It's a constructed psychological identity, not something that you're born with. It's not this like innate part of you. And so as you go down this pathway, it's not this like magic path to fixing all your mental health problems. In many cases, your mental health problems get worse because now you're starting to become very neurotic about passing. You start thinking about passing all the time, like like, am I passing in this public setting, or how are people perceiving me, how how are people judging me? And so, yeah, I think this is a very concerning pattern, because Finster is not the only young autogynephilic male who's been conditioned down this pathway. The entire online transgender egg culture is taking all these men, and you throw in the combination of gender ideology, these porn-soaked internet communities that are just sick with all this depravity, which is planting these ideas in people's heads, getting people addicted to the euphoria of all this like pornographic content and all the fetishistic content, and the femboy content, the sissy content, the crossdresser content. um, it's all very degenerate, and it leads to, I think, a form of addiction. You get addicted to the euphoria that comes from feminization, and that can drive you down the pathway. Now, I do want to preface all this by saying that there are different subtypes of autogynephilia. Not all autogynephiles fit into this particular pattern of Finster. Someone who didn't grow up with a lot of dysphoria, but the dysphoria developed later in life, after the trans identification, after taking the hormones, after deciding to try and pass or trying to go down this pathway. So there are some other autogynephiles for whom the like hatred of one's masculinity, and this incongruence that you feel inside yourself with your this like incongruence between your desires and your body, it manifests much earlier in life. So there are different subtypes within this category, but this the, but I think the category that Finster fits into is certainly the more it is the majority of the population of men who are transitioning these days. So this represents to me a dangerous precedent that we see in our society, as men are, and a lot of this ties into incel psychology. So I've talked on my channel about this incel to trans pipeline. You feel like a failed male, you feel like emasculated, you do feel like you or the idea of growing up to be a man, growing up to becoming masculine, it sort of like bothers you. And so Finster has said that part of his motivation to take hormones is to sort of like his fear of growing old as a man. That I think reflects the sort of Peter Pan syndrome of not wanting to grow up, wanting to maintain this youth. And so that, I think, comes from a sort of gender wound, a masculinity wound that happens in childhood. And then it's just this fear of becoming masculine because you didn't properly develop an identification with masculine role models in your life, and so you didn't properly um, model, or you didn't get masculinity modeled for you in a way that said like, yes, I can be that person, I can grow up to be that masculine man. And so that creates these gender wounds. And then as you go through puberty and as you get exposed to pornography often, then that wound becomes sexualized, and now it becomes part of this kink, which is why being forced to be feminized becomes so erotic, because it's tapping into this unconscious need, or this unconscious wound in regards to having all these insecurities about being a man and all these things. So okay, hopefully this was helpful. And Finster, if you're watching this, because I know I did a video about Finster a while back, maybe like a year ago, and he actually watched it and responded to it. So if you're watching this, Finster, I don't mean any offense. Hopefully this was insightful to you. Yeah, I hope you watch this, and I wish you well. And yeah, so okay, well, that's it. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless. Bye bye.